Good morning, everyone, and hello. I'm Dr. Cam, and today I'm joined by Rish Mitra. And Rish is the founder of Dads and Deadlifts. And I love talking to Rish because he is one of the most enthusiastic dads I've ever met. And you have such an amazing message because it's all about men and being like just leaning into being a dad and how to use that. And I want to get started with you, but I want to just preface it with I've talked to a lot of dads that, especially when their kids become teens, and especially when they start feeling like they don't have a role anymore. And they kind of start backing off and focusing on, I'm here to support them financially and mom will raise them. And so I really want to talk to you about how to lean in as a dad. So welcome, Rish.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Yeah.
Happy New Year. And I'm really excited.
So tell us first of all about Dads and Deadlifts and kind of your story behind that and how you got started in that.
So, it's funny because I have been asked this question so many times, and I think like I'm still evolving. But finally, I think I'm at a point where, Stoics called, and I'm a big fan of believer in Stoicism, and they call it like, sometimes we all have to know who we are. And when someone asks you who are you, what's your really answer, or subjective answer is always very like surface level most of the time, because I used to be that guy. Oh, I'm Rich and I'm an engineer, I do this, I do that. But really, through my pain and trauma over the last couple of years ago, right around when my son was born, I realized that through my healing journey that I'm a dad. I really am. I don't enjoy, and I don't say it to just to mean it. I actually, just to say it, I really mean it. Like I feel like I find myself so much present in the now when I'm with my kid, when I'm with
Hmm.
my son, and with other kids. So I think like that's basically how everything has started. But I was, in a rocky marriage, and when my son was born, as it happens with a lot of fathers, which I know now, back then I didn't, we get into the zone like, what's our role?
Hmm.
Because no one really teaches us our role. Or you're supposed to be a father, and you just take care of the mother, and for 6 months. At the end of the day, you're also a human being, and there are questions, there are concerns, and like we don't, and coupled with all the social stigma that I raise awareness about, man up, and we should keep it to ourselves, and you don't have any platform, we don't have any place to talk to. And yes, I mean, therapists and counselors are there, but when you are a new parent, barely getting like a couple of hours of sleep, I mean, everything goes out the window. You're constantly rescheduling everything. Um, so having said that, that's when I realized, like, I was getting addicted to alcohol. Because I mean, I was already, me and my ex were not in a very good place, and now we have this kid. And and then of course, when I reach out to my friends, they would be like, "Ah, just man up. It's
Hmm.
okay. It's part of it, right?" And that's how it all started. And my son was, I think, 6 months, 6 months, 7 months old, and first time he called me Dara, and I was drunk.
Hmm.
And and that's when it hit me, like something needs to change. And so of course, as we all do, we men, we are raised like that, like sports, and go and run, and like all these things. And I joined CrossFit, and I started working out. I started taking my anger, my frustration, whatever you want to call it, all those negative emotions, and it's helpful, but at the end of the day, you still have to take care of this,
Hmm.
your mind. And so I started, getting back into meditation, and these are the things that I've always done that. But that's what questioned me, like, if a person like me who was into self-improvement for 13 years, and I had done Tony Robbins, Unleash the Power Within, Date with Destiny, Walked on Fire and all that, if I slip like that, there are people who don't even have the resources.
Hmm.
So I started researching, and the numbers started, like, I could see the numbers, and it started getting scarier for me. I'm like, wow, I mean, like 70% of all suicides are men. 51% of men are at any given point of time emotionally and sexually abused.
Mm.
Every 9 minutes, a kid in America is sexually abused. And I had been a sexual abuse survivor. And that's another thing that happened during all this time. One day I just felt like, really not feeling well while I was with my son. And come to find out, working through my counselor, that all the trauma of unhealed trauma of sexually being abused as a kid came back, because as a father now, my body is like go on a fight or flight mode, basically, which I didn't even know. So it's all sorts of revelation over last 2 years and learning, um, and that's when I really started. I'm like, okay, I'm going to create how many people are there and share their stories and create a soundboard and platform for people, that you are not alone. And there are people like that. And that's when I started researching and looking for. And that's how the platform started, podcast. And it kind of now blew into a book. I'm this close to finishing up, and it's supposed to release mid this year, Man Up, different approach for a different era. And now there's a foundation, Dads and Deadlifts Foundation. So it just kind of 2020 just
Like
kind of
keep rolling,
just
yeah.
rolling. And I think it's needed because I'm gaining the momentum, and I'm seeing the need.
Mhm.
I'm seeing the need that there is a void in this space, in this platform. And not just about raising awareness about men, it's also understanding that how these social stigmas are affecting our girls and our women too. Because
Yeah.
if it's not us versus them, it's together, right? Like it's always that it's not me or you, it's me and you. And if men are not present, if boys are not speaking up, if men are objectifying women, because that's just how, if that's how we are raised,
Yeah.
uh, that's exactly what the other side is facing too. So uh, to have that clarity for the boys and men and give them give them those tools and personal development, young age, will definitely help them, and kind of give them the direction and break that stigma and break that
Yeah.
cycle.
So you talk about this man up, the concept of man up, and I know we've talked a little bit about this before too, and I think this is so important. And I was telling you, I talked to my niece a few weeks ago about gender roles and breaking free from these, and you talk a lot about that from the guy's perspective of
Right.
what we expect from boys and how that's impacting them, because we do box them in, right? We have these expectations of what they're supposed to be. So talk a little bit about how do we approach and help our boys be more authentic and true to themselves in this world and society where they have these different expectations.
Yeah. So the first things first is understanding the problem, right? Like I talk about in my book, there's like different areas I talk about. And one of the step I talk about, because I kind of started working on myself, and really the book is about like taking the readers through the journey of how I healed and took the actions, because you have to first acknowledge the problem. And a lot of people don't understand, and I wrote in my book too, it's not about the experience. That means when I say experience, I mean, like, say for example, I went through a sexual abuse because I kept my mouth shut. It's not about the experience, it's about what you learn from that experience that matters. That means I had to understand, I had to sit down and break it down. Like, I'm 37 years old back then, now I'm 39. All these years, it didn't occur to me that, like, I didn't even think too much about it.
Mm-hmm.
Was it there? Sure, probably. I mean, I was just a happy-go-lucky guy. It hit me until my son was born. And there's that thing about, like, trauma stays in your body. It
Yeah.
stays in the DNA, and it's been proven, it's scientifically proven. And so the first thing I talk about is calm. Like, I know, like, I used to hate the word when people would tell me as a kid, like, calm down, calm down. And I have this thing about, like, taking everything that I get pain from, and I actually use it as my purpose. So I actually took this word, and I was really kind of, I talked this in my book too, is like calm. Like, first you gotta see is communicate. You have to communicate to yourself if it's your own problem. That means for me, the way I communicate is I write.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, to answer your question, for anyone who's listening and then they're facing this challenge, like, okay, I don't have anyone to talk to, or I feel like I'm in boxed in this, like boys don't cry, right? Even for women,
Mm-hmm.
you got to sit down and communicate the problem. If you're young, communicate with your parents. If you have a good friend, communicate with them. If not, then the best thing I say, communicate with yourself. That's probably the most important part that we miss all the time, is like people underestimate journaling. I think that journaling is
Mm-hmm.
one of the best thing to
So
do.
powerful.
It's your own meditation, it's your own self-care. You're talking to yourself, and that's very much needed because you are actually creating. We talk to ourselves all day long, but when we actually write the problem, you give life to the problem. You can see it. And so that's the first thing I do. Like, communicate the problem to yourself. Like, okay, just write it down. Don't think too much about it. And it may look like, uh, my friends didn't understand me. Okay. Second is A, which is accountability. You have to understand, like, really brutally honest, what's your part in the problem. That means what kind of accountability you have. Like sometimes you will see like you only have only 1%, you have nothing. So then for a fact, if it's outside your control, then there's no point trying to fix it. That's where you get into anxiety mode. That's where you get into depression. That's where you get into in your head.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's your outside your control, no matter how many times you go about it, you cannot solve the problem. So you can at least see it. And now if you see that, okay, I have 3%, 10%, 50% accountability to the problem, the next is lean in. That this is where I talk about, like, take yourself outside the box. When you're inside that box, when you're inside the problem,
Mm-hmm.
that's your emotions controlling the problem. So that's why we go to therapists. That's why we go to coach, because that third party perspective is needed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to deal with day-to-day issues, day-to-day problems and the stigmas and on the moment decision, the right decision that can help you, you need to also learn from that tool, that I need to be my own third party sometime. Like I need to step out of the problem, see the problem as a bigger picture. Like, okay, so this is what's going on. Here is my role, and this is the main problem.
Mm-hmm.
And just start writing it down. And you might see accountable, even in accountability and this lean in phase, which I call analyze phase, there, like your accountability statement might start changing. Your problem might be like, okay, my friends are not understanding me. And then accountability statement, you are taking the responsibility on yourself. You might start writing like, my friends didn't understand me because I didn't communicate well. Okay, then there you go. Like, then there's a problem. You need to speak up, or you need to communicate more. And then the leaning phase, analyze phase, you are really digging deep, like, you're breaking down the problem. That, okay, so if I have a communication problem, how can I help? Why do I have a communication problem? Why can I not communicate with my parents, my friends? Is this something I'm thinking? Is this something they had done to me? So write those things down. And then M is the mitigate the problem, is basically lowering the effect on yourself, right? Because if you're in the problem, if you feel that that vision of the problem is so big, created by our own narrative, it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to even think about that problem in chunks. So basically, you're really breaking that problem down in leaning phase, and you try to come up with ideas how to mitigate the problem, which is now invite the people who are involved in it in that circle and talk to them like, look, I feel this way.
Yeah.
I That's my feeling. How do you feel? How do you know? It's a communication at the end of the day. So to answer your question, that's probably my biggest tool that I did. Is there are things that I faced, I had to communicate that to me in journal, and then I had to reach out and I had to openly tell the guys, like, I feel now at 37, 38, uh, I feel that this thing came up, and I know you did this to me, and I forgive you, because that was my closure. That had to be my closure. And then you take that, whatever your accountability was. That means I didn't speak up. Why did I didn't speak up? Because I had been told to shut up.
Yeah.
So this is just you just have to start breaking down each problem one by one, and of course reach out to people. There are always people, like, open up. Like, a lot of people, I think, doesn't open up to counselors is because there's always that fear that if I open up too much, they might think like I'm at a risk.
Yeah.
And then the institution and, other authorities might get involved. So a lot of people that, because of that, doesn't open up. So this is why, as parents, we have to give them, and I know you and I talked about it on my podcast too, is you have to give that safe space to your kid. And this is why, I mean, I think a lot of people think like, it's me doing it. I think like it's really less me doing it. I'm just reacting to what he's doing, and I'm just going along for the ride. So
Well, one of the things too, you've got this calm, and a way to really address it. And I think there's still this gap between getting in touch with our feelings and journaling about it, and the man up concept of, helping boys even get in touch with their feelings and showing that that's okay. And I think that's a really, where I see it is, I think for boys, it seems to be okay to be angry. So a lot of times they take every emotion they have and turn it into anger and punch the wall, right? And girls, it's the opposite. We're not really allowed to get angry. We're allowed to get sad. So we take all of our emotions and we cry, right?
Right.
So, but then it's not really the right outlet or a healthy outlet. And so from the perspective of parents helping their sons accept and express and validate their emotions. How do we do this when most of us as adults are coming from the place still, it's so ingrained in us that that's not okay.
Right.
It's still in our minds, not okay for boys to cry. How do we pull that together?
It's a very difficult question because it's not going to be answered in in one day or just by one initiative. Like, this is where it's tough. This is where you can see I started a podcast, and now I could see the momentum. Even the women is reaching out like, okay, yeah, I mean, this is a worthy cause. Now, the thing is, the reason it's a worthy cause because it's a problem. And this problem had been neglected for a long time. And now, as you said, are we better than our previous generation? Getting better because of social media, because of awareness, because of our generation next, after us, they are getting involved in social and all of this status. And as you said, your niece, right? So is it helpful? It's getting better, but if you have that knowledge being passed on to you, your narrative's gonna be solely based on that. Unless you or we, I should say at 40s, needs to break the cycle for our next generation. So to answer your question, is it easy? No. Is it doable? Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing. It's not a rocket science. It's about understanding our own behavior. It's not that we men don't have heart. It's not that like women don't get angry. We have been told to behave in a certain way. So it's a stigma. It's a cultural evolution and a way that we are being told to express ourselves. How do we do it? You really have to take that onus on yourself. Like, okay, I want to change. I want to be that guy who will show up as real as I can be with my son. Yeah. And I told my son, you are my accountability partner. He is 3 years old. And sometimes when I get angry, he said like, Dada, be nice. I'm like, oh yeah. And then he says like, take a deep breath, because I tell him that, because I meditate with him. And then he's like, okay, grumpy time. Right. So this is a new thing that we started. So when I get grumpy, it's like grumpy time. I'm like, okay, fine. So
it's cute coming from a 3-year-old, not so much a 13-year-old. Sometimes you have to reset how you think about it.
Yeah, so I don't know at 13 how it will react, so yet to see, but I can only speak from my toddler standpoint. But the fact is, Dr. Cam, like it's if we keep uh, understanding one simple thing, that we are all humans, and we talk about it, we write quotes about it, we share memes about it, but when it comes to us, we tend to forget that we are all humans.
Mhm.
And we are being, like, some way, in socio-cultural and ways, been taught to behave our in certain way. But those humans, those emotions are human emotions.
Yeah.
Those emotions are not based on genders. We just subdued the anger for our girls, and we decided, like, we subdued the tears for our boys.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
not that they are not crying. They're crying behind closed doors.
yeah, and
They're
inside.
crying inside.
Mhm.
So, and I wrote in my book, like, your inner child is screaming to get out, but we are not letting them. So it starts with acknowledging, for anything else, like, that I need to change. I mean, I know it sounds easy, it sounds corny, it sounds like that simple. Yeah, it's that simple. But the problem is, how many of us are really doing it? Just like New Year resolution, right? Like, yeah, let's do it. And then after a month or two, people just like, oh,
You got the whole month. I'm impressed.
I mean, I don't even make resolution anymore. I just, like, daily things. It's like, it's just, I think, like, that's what it comes down to, is you can change if you want. You don't need to wait for a year to do that. But that's where I think, to answer your question, it's hard. It's very difficult. And messages like these just needs to be shared and shared and shared. And then you just keep pounding and keep hitting the same messages over and over again, because I think, like, people needs to hear, and more people understand, more and more people realize and hear about this, then they are aware of it, and then they come up like, oh, yeah, maybe I should think about it.
Yeah.
Because you'll be surprised, in last 6 months, I had thought like no one was talking about it, but once I started looking around social media, I have connected with so many groups run by dads, and we are all coming together collectively too, as a group and community, speaking on each other's platforms. And the biggest thing that I found is fear. They're afraid.
Mm.
And I think it goes to say that how we are trained as a society, that to not speak up.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm talking about the specific scenario in terms of man up and boys don't cry, but because we're conditioned to it
Yeah.
since we were kids. Now, are there exceptions? Of course, there are exceptions. There always will be exceptions, but majority of it is the fact. It's a fact. Even if you're adults, even if you are the most vulnerable one, and if you are showing as real all the time, you're gonna meet with people. You will have a tribe. You will have friends. You might have friends. They will be like, and then you will try to fit in those group. So how do you? So there's a lot of dynamics. That's not very easy. It's not black and white. It's
Mhm.
not binary. So there's a lot of work to be done, but one step at a time. I feel like the first thing is to keep raising awareness. There's nothing more valuable than that. Just keep raising awareness for our next generation. And as a parent, I would say, and this is what, as a, from the dad perspective, and of course from a women's perspective too, just keep telling our boys, keep telling our girls, it's okay. It's okay to get angry. It's okay to cry. It's okay to get sad. It's okay to be happy. Just show your emotions, but you also then showing them the real you, and giving them the permission that it's okay to show up with their emotions, and they're not going to be penalized. Now, that's another thing that you also have to remember as a parent. Like, you cannot just go, when it's good, when you're in a good mindset, then it's okay. Then you're having a bad day and suddenly your son, kid is crying, or and they're like, hey, shut up, why are you crying? That cannot happen. You have to be very careful with that. And I'm very mindful about that. Like, I think, like, I used to be like, and then now I stop myself. I'm like, it's not worth it.
Mhm.
And then I process. And this is why I'm like, okay, you will be my accountability partner. So what I'm really showing him, like, hey, I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
I'm a man. I'm not going to pretend that I'm perfect, and he will not be either. So let's be each other accountability partner. Let's show you that. Just call someone out. If they're being not nice to you, just tell them, hey, you're not being nice to me. So I'm giving him that independence that he can express himself. And at the same time, I'm also having him realize that his dad is not gonna be not those dad, like, just saying man up.
Yeah.
And that in turn he can cry, and he expresses himself too. And I could see the difference. So it's really not an easy answer to answer your question. It's very difficult because all we can do is hope, raising awareness and talking and doing seminars and doing sharing messages to grow the community enough and give that safe space to men to understand that.
Yeah.
And then the difficult task is for them to do it. Again, as I said, they're afraid. No one wants to be the first one. I was like,
That's the big piece of it, Rich, that I'm thinking
mm-mm.
of is the even desire to do it. And one thing I want to just throw in there is the importance of doing this, and why we want to change this is because when we're telling our kids that their emotions aren't acceptable, we're telling them that they, as a person,
Yeah,
is not acceptable, that they are broken. And so we start believing that something's wrong with us, and we take that into adulthood,
yeah,
right? And so I think for adults, it is so ingrained. And I've talked to parents, and they would rather tell their kids not to do something and tell them to stop feeling the way that they naturally feel for fear that they might be bullied by other people that aren't accepting of it. So they teaching them, change you to fit into other people's expectations. And this is not a healthy thing to teach our kids, right?
yeah,
Because then they're constantly fighting to figure out, how do I fit in? What do I do? Me's not okay. I have to change. Um, I think instead, it's teaching your kids to be resilient, to stand up to people that question their authentic selves.
right.
And I don't think that's the way we do it. We switch it around. And so let's put our kids first and our kids' authentic self first
Yes,
over the opinions of random people that we don't even know,
right.
which we do. We do that.
Yeah,
And so that's really important. And it's stepping over this belief that is, again, so ingrained, it's hard. And I'm even sensing people going, and dads and moms. I mean, I've heard a lot of moms, boys don't cry. Boys are
mm-hmm,
tough. Boys, I don't want my boy being the crybaby because then people are going to beat him up. I don't want my boy being the sissy boy, right?
mm-hmm,
But then we're telling him that the way that you are is not okay.
right. And
So,
then, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just saying, how do we address our own beliefs to realize, how do we get over these hurdles of our own just set in stone belief of these gender discrepancies?
I try to address this issue a little bit in one of the chapters in my book. On my book too is how do we break the cycle and breaking the cycle. And again, these are just my opinion and just like the stuff that I'm doing with my son, and I'm seeing a difference. And how will it pan out when he grows up? I don't know, but I'm gonna keep trying as long as I'm seeing some results. And so that's all we can do. Um, you have to take yourself out of your way, like their way. Um, when kids are born, it's fresh. I mean, their mind is like clean slate,
Yeah.
and everything they're learning, and we know this is not something new that I'm talking about. Everyone knows this. You're a medical professional. I'm just an engineer. I just read all books and books and books, and our narratives, the way we behave, are created either by definitely a huge part of our parents, right? I mean, that's the first people we get to hang out with or were raised by, and then our family members, then we go out in the world, then school, teachers, and yada yada yada. And so the best way you can do, you cannot control everything. I cannot control the outside people. I cannot control if there's a bully. I cannot control if there's another guy. And actually there's something happened, and I'll come to that a couple of weeks ago. and how I handle it with my son Rihan. Um, but you have to also understand, like, if you really want to, first you have to, as I said, like I keep saying it, like you have to be interested in making a change. Just being there, that's not going to happen. You have to understand, do I want to break this cycle or not? Do I want to break this cycle of trauma? Do I want to break this cycle of boys don't cry and all that? Because at the end of the day, like I'll tell you, and I talk to my mom too all the time. My parents were amazing people, but my dad was like me, very rebellious. Just he will say what he wants to say. My mom was the person who wants to please people, right? And growing up, I took a little bit more on my dad's side, and I'm still like him. And growing up in India in 80s and 90s, called the black sheep of the family, because you're just supposed to, kids are not heard but seen. That's it. That's just basically the mentality of it. So do I have that in me right now? Yes, it is, because I was raised by my mom and my dad.
Mm-hmm.
I have to actively practice to keep that side controlled, because otherwise, then again, I'm going back to a place where I'm really not living my life, but someone else's life, and how they see it, how they observe it, how people ask me like, hey, I mean, all this things you're doing, how's your parents, how do your family things? I'm like, I don't even ask them. That's not my lookout. I mean, if they have to ask me, they can ask me, but I'm just doing what I feel I should live my life like. So that's the concept, that's so basically you are leading by example, I'm leading by example. So that's one thing, that you have to first start working on yourself, and there's no way around it. Then they will see it. Even if you don't, the next step I would say is, the best way we can do is really have them, give them the what's the word I'm looking for here, resource, give them the resource for someone else. Like if you think like, hey, you know what, it's too much for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I think like things are opening up now, like going to coach, a counselor, a therapist. There's all negative connotation to it. I'm like, why are we making this all negative?
Yeah.
Just like you go to a doctor for your pediatrician for your health checkup, your mind is in your body. So
Yeah.
yes, you need that. Yes, you need a kids coach if you need that. If you think like you are incapable of showing your kid how to be authentic and vulnerable, take help. You don't have to do it all yourself. There are resources now. And people are like, oh, I don't know what people are going to think. Again, do you rather want people think about your kid and then your kid turning out to be what you just said, like completely not trying to, where do I fit in? Versus, do you want your kid to be really independent and like make his own decision, make her own decision, and be their own self, like saying, I can do anything.
Yeah.
And I can be anything. I don't need to fit in any box. So that's the thing that you should really ask yourself. Anyone, any parents especially, should ask himself. Like, and you again, you don't have to do it by yourself. I'm not doing everything by myself. I'm learning from books and all. That's what I'm passing it on. It's not all me. There's always a community, and there's always help. And when the time comes, yeah, absolutely, I would love to take him to, you know, like I told him, like, I wrote in my journal, this is my vision, like, next 10 years, I mean, me and him gonna be at the same seminar of Tony Robbins. Like, I want to instill that.
Yeah.
I don't want to wait till I found it after I was like 20. I want to instill that in him.
Yeah.
So again, there are help. It's not like there's no help.
That's wonderful. So Rish, we are already going a little over, but I've loved this conversation. So before we go, I just want to let people know how to find you and how to work with you if they want to work with you, and then any parting words of inspiration you want to share with us.
So of course, my Instagram and Facebook page, Dads and Deadlifts. And my podcast is on 7 platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Dads and Deadlifts. Actually, as I said right before this session, your episode came out yesterday.
So go check out my episode.
And parting words. I think one thing I do tell people a lot, and I do that, is based on your conversation. We need to start acting than talking. Uh, our kids are watching us, and that's one thing that we keep forgetting. So you can tell the kid, like, anything you want, but they're really watching your behaviors, your actions, your deeds, what you're doing. So that's why just, act more than you talk, and as I said, like, I don't just tell him to be fit. I take him with me to CrossFit and he works out with me. um, I don't just work, I make him sit next to me and work on his uh, fire tablet, even if he's just playing around an interactive game of Peppa the Pig. But that's still instilling a thing that, hey, an hour of focus is an hour of focus. And then don't just, and this is one of the biggest thing that I learned is like, don't tell them to listen, first listen to them. So
Yes.
These are the things that anything I would say to any parents and anyone who's listening, for sure.
Thank you so much, Rish, and we're going to end on that. And thank you again for joining me. This has been a really fun conversation.
Thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.